Just because you're a Christian doesn't mean that you're going to be free from fear, worry, old habits, discouragement, anger, or any of those kinds of things. Having a relationship with Jesus Christ, knowing the God of the Old Testament and the New Testament certainly helps. But we've been looking at characters that even though they were in a right relationship with God, they had fears. They had misgivings. They wondered what the future was going to bring. And I can't tell you the number of times that I talk to young people, millennials, and they ask the question, you know, should I get married and bring children into this world because this is a crazy world? And for the first time probably in several generations, that's a very real, fearful thought for a lot of our young people and millennials. So we've been looking at foundations, and we've been looking at the life of Jacob. And I want to suggest today that old fears are hard to change. They don't go away very easily. Nor does old anger or old habits or old anxiety. And we're looking at Genesis chapter 33. And Jacob, now if you remember, we left Jacob in the north of Israel, in Peniel, up by the Jordan River. And he was wrestling with God. And he had a great victory with God. And that changed his relationship with God. That changed his spirituality. But it didn't take away all of his fear. And he was moving back into the land to claim the land that God had promised to Abraham and Isaac. And here's Jacob 20 years later, and he's about to meet his brother Esau. Now he hasn't seen Esau for 20 years. And the last time he saw Esau, do you remember what Esau said? This is like Esau seesaw, right? What Esau said was, I'm going to kill you. Right? He threatened to take Jacob's life. And so if someone 20 years ago said, the next time I see you, I'm going to kill you, how reluctant would you be to run into that person? And this is what Jacob is facing. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah. Remember, Leah and Rachel and the two female servants. They were the wives of Jacob, Leah and Rachel. And the other two female servants of Leah and Rachel, who Jacob had children with. He put the female servants and their children in the front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear, and he himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. What was he doing here? It's a little scheming. It's kind of like, all right, if you're a general in the army, you're going to put your foot soldiers out there first because you don't care if they get picked off. So what he is doing, he's arranging people in his life in order of importance. And he had already sent ahead a couple of contingents to try to assuage Esau. And so they were of, sadly to say, lesser importance in Jacob's whole thought process and makeup of things. But what was very important was Leah and Rachel and Joseph, and so he put them towards the back and put the servants more up front. And then, look what he does. He himself went on ahead. He saw Esau coming, and he bowed to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. Why? Not because 7 is necessarily a holy number, but what he is doing is he's humbling himself before his brother. He's trying to figure out, hey, maybe if I come, I look humble, I look kind of destitute, I grovel a little bit before him, maybe he'll show some mercy to me. So now some of it might have been out of respect as well, but to bow 7 times and just move forward and move forward and move forward and keep bowing, I wonder what Esau was thinking. Bible Knowledge Commentary says, Jacob still showed weakness and fear when he met Esau. He wrestled with God. He was winning with God. It was a spiritual highlight in his life, and yet turn the picture, and the next thing you know, after 20 years, he's meeting Esau, and he's scared, and he's fearful, and he feels weak. He lined up his children and wives in order of their importance to him. Now watch out, wives, if your husband does that, okay? With Rachel and Joseph in the rear, the safest place, okay? If husbands or wives, if you put your husband or your wife back in the safest place, you know that you're in their good graces. That's basically what he was doing. Continue. Jacob bowed down to the ground 7 times in homage, thus halting on his way toward Esau. This was an onshore thing. He was filled with fear. Esau, however, eagerly ran to meet Jacob. He didn't bow down before him. He just ran over and embraced him. And that must have been a surprise after 20 years. He kissed him, and they both wept together. What a change is made when God fights in his way. God had gone before and prepared the heart of Esau. Now, Esau and Jacob had problems. Their nations would still have problems for many, many years to come, even in the future. But God had gone before and fought for Jacob and had prepared Esau's heart. Isn't it nice if you're praying about things and you have someone who doesn't like you, they're kind of an enemy or whatever, and you can pray through that, and the next thing you know, God has changed their heart, and there's not that animosity anymore? That's a great thing to be praying about. Esau greets Jacob with kindness. I'm going to go to that passage, verse 4 of Genesis 33. But Esau ran to meet Jacob. What was Jacob doing? Bowing down, bowing down, bowing down, hedging his bets, but not Esau. Esau had dealt with it, he had forgiven him, and he ran to embrace this brother that he hadn't seen for 20 years. Who did that? God did that. God changed Esau's heart, and Esau certainly wasn't a perfect individual. And he ran to him, and he embraced him, and he threw his arms around his neck, and he kissed him, and they wept. Then Esau looked up and saw the women and the children, and he said, "Who are these with you?" He had never met the family. Jacob answered, "They are the children God has graciously given your servant." So there's this little family reunion. Then the female servants and their children approached, and they bowed down. Then next Leah and her children came and bowed down. Last of all came Joseph and Rachel, and they too bowed down, because Jacob had been warning them about this situation. You know, it's been 20 years. I haven't seen my brother. I don't know how it's going to go. And I'm kind of fearful. And they were rightly fearful as well. But some of it was also bowing down for respect. Jacob's gift to Esau demonstrate 2 things, both his fear and his change of heart. I want you to see this. In verse 8, Esau asked, "What is the meaning of all these flocks and herds I met?" He brought them as gifts. And Jacob says, "To find favor in your eyes, my Lord." I want you to see that. Because he doesn't say, "To find favor in your eyes, my brother." He doesn't greet him that way. It's a more distant greeting. It's "my Lord." It's this one of respect, but also one of fear built into it. But Esau said, "I already have plenty." And what does he say? "My brother." He calls him his brother. He doesn't call him his Lord. He doesn't. And remember, in the prophecy of things, in the birth of Jacob and Esau, it said that Esau would serve Jacob, that the older would serve the younger, and the family had worked against that so very much that it became a dysfunctional family. It was really a mess, and yet this is what God wanted to do. And so Jacob is still doing the same thing. He's doing things out of fear, even though he's got a spiritual relationship with God. He's not quite sure what his brother will do. And he looks to give these gifts to find favor in his brother's eyes, because he doesn't know if his brother's going to come and strike him dead. I already have plenty, my brother, Esau says. Keep what you have for yourself. God had worked in Esau's heart to make him a more generous person. And God can do that with us. No, please, said Jacob. If I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God. When had Jacob seen the face of God? The chapter before, in the wrestling match. And he fought, as we looked at it, you can go back to that message, he fought face to face with God. And he's saying, you know, Esau, seeing the kindness of your face, seeing your face, being reunited, it's like seeing God. It's like seeing the face of God. Now that you've received me favorably. Please accept the present that was brought to you, for God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need. Isn't that a great base to work from? Wherever you are in your station in life, whatever you possess, whatever you have, you know it's temporary. You can't take it with you. In the dedication I did yesterday, I said children are on loan from God. They don't belong to you. Some days you want to give them back early. But eventually, they belong to God, so you have to make sure that you give them back to God. And Jacob came from a position, he says, God's been great to me. Now, whether you have a lot or whether you have a little, if you have contentment in your heart, you can say that I can give out of the abundance that God has given me. And I'm not talking material things. I'm talking about your time, your energy, your resources, your kindness, your love. And if you can say, God's been gracious to me. I was just bowing my head during communion, and I get overwhelmed every time I go through communion. Because I'm like, God, I don't deserve all that you've done in my life, the way you've blessed. First of all, I don't even deserve salvation. I don't even deserve to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. I didn't work for that. I didn't earn it. You gave it as a gracious gift. And we all could say the same thing. But I look at it and I say, God, you have blessed my life so much. I have all that I need. And you may not feel that way. And I feel badly for you if you don't feel that way. If you're still clinging and clawing for something else besides Jesus Christ, besides the living God. But Jacob was able to say, I have all that I need. And remember, changed his name to Israel, which means fights with God or contends with God, meaning that God fought for him. And because Jacob insisted, Esau went ahead and accepted these gifts. Boy, there are some people in this congregation, if you try to do something nice for them, they fight you tooth and nail. Because they have the concept that, you know what, I ought to be doing something for you. And that's a great way. If we all do that, that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. But sometimes you need to just bow your head and say, you know what, like Esau, I'll accept this as a gift from God. I'll accept this as part of your work, God. Bible Knowledge Commentary again. Jacob's explanation that seeing Esau's face was like seeing the face of God showed he knew this deliverance from harm by Esau was of God. 20-year grudge, and it dissolves. At Peniel, Jacob, where he wrestled with God, had seen the face of God and was delivered. Having lived through that, he then survived Esau. Dealing with Esau, even though he had fear and reticence, was not difficult because he had dealt with the living God. Thus, Esau's favorable reaction was God's gracious dealing. If you have an enemy, if you have someone who has a grudge against you, are you praying about it? Are you letting God go before you and asking God? Say, God, you know what? I can't resolve this. I can't change that person's mind. I can change my mind, but I can't change that person's mind. God, would you do it? And that's what God did with Esau after a 20-year grudge. In Jacob, God brought about a spirit of humility and generosity. Jacob was also changed. He wasn't heel grabbing with Esau. He wasn't trying to manipulate it, but he was fearful. He was scared. Esau was changed from seeking revenge to desiring reconciliation with his brother. Sadly, and this is Jacob, and we do the same thing as Christians, sometimes we fall back to old fears and habits because that's a comfortable place. We fall back to anxiety when God has gone before us and fought. We fall back to worry. We fall back to anger. We fall back to old habits that are not productive habits. We fall back to lying to ourselves or lying to others. And Jacob had a series of excuses in this encounter. And I want you to see this because it has to do with geography, and I love it. Verse 12, then Esau said, let us be on our way, I'll accompany you. Okay, brother Jacob, I'm gonna travel with you. But Jacob said to him, first excuse, my Lord knows that the children are tender, and that I must care for the ewes and the cows that are nursing their young. That was not necessarily true. That was a ruse. That was an excuse. If they are driven hard just one day, all the animals will die. So Jacob puts it back on his situation and says, well, I can't travel with you, Esau. So let my Lord go on ahead of his servant, while I move along slowly at the pace of the flocks and herds before me, and the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir. Now, what was Jacob doing? Jacob said, I don't want to deal with Esau because I don't trust people. He might change his mind along the way. Have you had that? A friend who was a great friend and then all of a sudden they stab you in the back? Everybody's had some experience with that kind of thing. And so he says, you go on to Seir. Now we're going to explain that in a minute. And then comes Jacob's second excuse. He said, we can't go because of the animals, and it's too hard on the children and the animals. And Jacob's second excuse I love. It's kind of like this. Glad to see you, now go away. Have you had that kind of experience? Yeah, Esau, it's great. We're reconciled. Now I don't want you in my life. Because I don't trust you because I'm fearful. I have 20 years of fear. And this would be a nice reunion, but you go live your place and I'll go live my place. And I'll give you the evidence of this in a moment. Verse 15, Esau said, then let me leave some of my men with you. But why do that? Jacob asked. Again, worry, fear, lack of trust. Just let me find favor in the eyes of my Lord. Still hasn't called him brother. So that day Esau started on his way back to Seir. You're going to find out where that is in a minute. Jacob, however, this is the interesting thing, went to Succoth, where he built a place for himself and made shelters for his livestock. That is why the place is called Succoth. Now, glad to see you, now go away. Guess what? If you know anything about geography, Esau headed south towards Egypt to Seir. Jacob headed exactly the opposite, north, back up where he was, because he did not want to live there next to him, because he was still afraid of Esau and what Esau might do. Jacob cleverly avoided traveling with Esau. He led Esau to think that he needed to travel slowly because of his young children and young animals, and that he would meet with Esau at Seir. But Jacob headed in the opposite direction, north to Succoth, east of the Jordan River and north of the Jabbok River, instead of south to Seir. He may have been wise to avoid Edom, that's where Esau was from, but he did not need to deceive his brother again. But he did it out of fear. Old habits die very, very hard. Fears go away. Anxiety, panic. Even if you're a Christian, they're hard to deal with. Verse 18, after Jacob came from Paddan Aram, he arrived safely at the city of Shechem in the north in Canaan and camped within the sight of the city. And for 100 pieces of silver he bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, the plot of ground where he pitched his tent. And there he set up an altar and called it El Elohe, Israel. I want you to see this. Incidentally, that name where he set up the altar, again, had the name of God, like in Bethel. El is the name for God. But I want you to see something. Here is the area of Edom. This is, the Red Sea down to Egypt, that area, the Sinai Peninsula. Seir is here. Jerusalem is north. This is the Dead Sea, the Sea of Galilee up here. And I'm going to show you another one in a moment. But Esau goes completely south, and I'll show you that again. This is a little farther north. This is where Shechem is. This is where the Jabbok River is and the Jordan River. So this area between Mount Gerizim and Mount Ephraim and Mount Ebal, that area is where Jacob would buy land, and it's very similar to what his father or his grandfather Abraham had done. But in the meantime, all the way down here is where Esau goes. So Jacob wants to separate from Esau. And sometimes you need to separate from an unpleasant experience. These verses form a sort of epilogue to Jacob's sojourn outside the land. He returned in peace and camped near Shechem, directly west of the Jabbok River and about 20 miles from the Jordan in Canaan. This is where Abraham first camped when he arrived in Canaan. So it goes back to Genesis chapter 12 and verse 6. Shechem was between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. Some of you have visited Israel and you've been to Shechem. I've been to Shechem. But it was the opposite direction of Esau because he didn't want to deal with it. And so if you look at it again, this is the area. This is Penuel or Peniel, where that encounter, the wrestling with God was. This is Shechem, just across the river in that area, and Succoth. And then here's Bethel, which Jacob would visit many, many times. And here's Hebron, and this area down here where Abraham bought his plot of land. So the nation of Israel is beginning to form there by God's grace, and that's also one of the reasons that he separated from Esau, because he wasn't settling down in this lower area. Jacob, like Abram, purchased a portion of the land, and there, like Abram, Jacob, or Israel, set up an altar and named it El Elohe Israel. El is the God of Israel, is what it means. In this way, he acknowledged that the Lord had led him all the way back from the land of his fathers, up there with Laban, to the land of Israel, and would establish that kingdom, which is still to be established in full today. Now, I want to give you a couple of principles. If you are away from God because of panic, because of fear, because of worry, because of anger, because of some relationship that doesn't seem to be able to fit the pieces together, God seeks to bring you back like he did Jacob. And God works to arrange things as he goes before you every day. You see that over and over again with Jacob. And then finally, I would encourage you to practice God's presence. See God in everything every day, even the smallest detail. The one thing Christians should be doing is practicing God's presence in prayer, which means saying to God, what do you want next? Where are you leading me next? In this health situation, in this panic, in this anxiety, in this anger, in this broken relationship, God, go before me. And he will. and he will. Let's close in prayer. Our Lord and our God, we thank you for these lessons of life because we can relate to them. Even as Christians, we have worry, we have anxiety, we have fear. We have trepidation about the future and the future of our nation and the future of our families. We realize this is a scary time and a scary place to be living. And yet at the same time, it is the most stable, secure place we could be if we're in your hands. And there isn't a person in this world, Lord, including us, that you won't go before like you did with Jacob, if they're willing to let you. We ask that you would break hearts. We ask that you would work in hearts. We ask that you would mend our society, not on any political basis, because that's insufficient, but on a spiritual basis. We need, as a nation, as a world, to come back to the living God. And that's the only hope we have. And we know that until the Lord returns, you will hold us in your hands. We don't know if we'll be able to worship here a year from now, a month from now. We don't know what rights and privileges we'll have. We don't know what our government or other governments might do. Lord, none of that is a sure thing. We're not guaranteed prosperity. We're not guaranteed money in our pockets or health or anything. We're only guaranteed your presence. And we have become so attached to our lifestyle, so attached to the things that we value that are not necessarily eternal, that you need to lift our eyes upward. So we give you thanks for that now. In Jesus' name, amen.